I am excited to be joined today by Shahid Buttar. He was the 2020 primary challenger to Nancy Pelosi from California. Shahid, thanks so much for joining us. How are you today?
I'm hanging in. I have my health, which is more than entirely too many Americans can say at the moment. So I'm thankful.
Absolutely. I mean, there are a million things that we should talk about. I know you and I, we've been trying to connect and, talk and listen to your voice as you were running in those primaries. And so I do want to talk to you about that. But I think you make a great point as to how many people are struggling right now. Could you speak about your feelings towards the Congress, the Senate, the bailout, the $2,000 checks, and just the condition of the American people, particularly the working class?
We're in a crisis with so many layered dimensions that I think people often forget just how bad it is right now. Many of us have privileges. One of mine is that I'm healthy right now. Another of mine is that I have some educational privilege. I think a lot of people at the moment are dealing with one dimension of challenges, whether it might be, for instance, a health crisis in their family, right? Any number of people, 300,000 in fact, have found their way to early graves, and 22 million Americans are infected at the moment. And every one of those people has family members who are concerned about them. But then add to that the eviction crisis that is building and spreading across the country. I've been volunteering at the SF Marin Food Bank. I've seen lines around the corner. I've seen videos online of lines at food banks that go down the highway. And the fact that Congress isn't convened right now, I mean, the stimulus payments that have been debated remain entirely inadequate, and they haven't even been passed yet. We need an ongoing universal basic income program, we need rent and mortgage relief, and we need Medicare for all. Those are just the beginnings of a response. I think we also forget how hollowed out the American middle class and working classes have grown or been reduced, let's say, over the course of decades of predation by Wall Street, supported by corporate politicians from both parties.
And in your campaign, you highlighted much of what you just said, right? That the concern and the compassion for working people across this country really animated your campaign. Tell us about your campaign and particularly the aftermath. You weren't able to be victorious this time, but from the looks of it, you don't plan on going anywhere.
I appreciate that. So yeah, I was the general election challenger to Nancy Pelosi in November 2020. I was the first Democrat that she ever faced in her 30-year career. And we won 81,000 votes from San Franciscans to win a new voice in Congress aligned with not just the working people of the United States, but I also would put on the table there international human rights, international climate justice, the future ultimately. And I'm not a politician. I'm an advocate. I've been a public interest lawyer, particularly fighting police departments and intelligence agencies for the last decade. And I'm basically so alarmed by our country having been steered off the rails that I suspended my career to jump into this race in 2018. So I've been in 3 elections, 2 races. In 2018 and 2020, I won the 2020 primary alongside Nancy Pelosi in our top 2 system here in California. And in each of the elections I've been in, we've doubled our vote count. In fact, between March and November 2020, we went from 33,000 votes to 81,000 votes, so much more than merely doubling. And that suggests to me that we're well on our way to liberating this seat in 2022. I haven't yet formally announced my plans. I'll put this out to your listeners. If folks want to see me run, we're inviting the support to make that possible. I don't have a political party behind me. So we're entirely reliant on the grassroots to make it happen. But I am remaining committed to holding Washington accountable, whatever that looks like. And I do hope to represent my city in Congress if I have the opportunity.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about other issues that are happening across the globe. And actually, before I even go to, I wanted to speak about Julian Assange. But before we go there, let's talk about what's happening right here in our capital, the undermining of democracy, the white supremacy that we saw marching and storming the gates of the Capitol. What are you seeing from your perspective?
And I see an assault on the Republic, which entirely was predictable. There was a whistleblower in 2004 who left the FBI. His name's Michael German, and he spent 17 years infiltrating white nationalist, white supremacist groups across the United States. In 2004, he quit to blow a whistle, join the ACLU, and said that there was massive organizing across a militia movement that the FBI was ignoring because it was too busy chasing Muslims and animal rights activists and inflating false threats based on those sorts of entrapment scenarios. And so nothing of last week should particularly surprise us. I do think the part that we should be especially alarmed about is the pattern that every preceding national security crisis has begat. Within days of the 9/11 attacks, proposals appeared off the shelf, pre-written proposals that ultimately became the USA Patriot Act that in 20 years have still never been the object of a transparent debate. And we should not fall prey to the ruse of security theater promoted by the military industrial policing complex to expand executive powers in response to this very legitimate crisis. There are plenty of laws that criminalize mobbing the Capitol and ransacking it. There are plenty of laws that criminalize violating the oath of office to invite that kind of violence. Those laws don't need to be expanded. The failures that we saw were failures of the executive branch, failures of police departments and the Pentagon. And the appropriate remedy for that failure is internal investigation and accountability, meaning some people need to get fired and they need to be replaced, and we need to have that kind of internal process. Expanding new laws to then give new pretexts for ways that dissent could in the future be further marginalized is not the answer. And I'm very wary of that pattern. I know that too many members of Congress don't appreciate civil liberties. I know that they're scared personally, and I totally get that. But fear is a bad place from which to legislate. They need to remember the oath of office, and we all need to remember the importance of guarding civil liberties, especially in a time of crisis.
Right. I mean, just to echo what you're saying, I mean, if you're thinking about the potential of expanding the executive branch's power as a response to this, it is the executive branch, particularly the president, right, the chief executive, who inflamed the situation. And this is just the result of his usage of social media in many regards. So the last thing we want to do is put more power in their hands. But I digress. The next question, speaking of civil liberties, is a conversation about Julian Assange in some very direct ways. The recent trial that revoked the extradition treaty, or revoked the request for extradition, keeping him from coming to the United States. Let's touch on that a few minutes before our time is up here. What were your thoughts on that decision and the implications for civil liberties?
It's great on the one hand that the UK chose not to extradite Assange to the US. That's incredibly important, because what that means functionally is that the right of the press to report on state secrets maintains some space. Unfortunately, the decision wasn't that robust. The UK didn't decide not to extradite him because they stood for the right of the press to publish state secrets. And it's worth putting this on the table. People remember a lot of things about Julian Assange, and they think a lot of things about Julian Assange. When I think of Julian Assange, I think of the collateral murder video. And this was a murder video that WikiLeaks posted that the US government had suppressed. And it shows US military officers gunning down journalists, laughing about it, and then covering it up. And it's incredibly important for that kind of information to have a chance to see the light of day. And the prosecution of Julian Assange is the first time that a publisher has been targeted for Espionage Act violations. That's an incredible threat, not just to the press, but to democracy. It's an attack on democracy, not unlike the attack on the Capitol, frankly. Right. And now the vindication of Assange isn't a full-throated vindication, because what the UK court did was essentially defer to the US on all the substantive questions, and then find, kind of like busting Al Capone for tax evasion, something of a not exactly a legal loophole. The reason that they chose not to extradite Assange is because the conditions of confinement in US prisons are so inhumane that they didn't want to let him effectively be tortured here in the United States and be left subject to potential suicide, knowing that he wouldn't get a fair trial. So it is the illegitimacy of our own justice, so-called justice system, that drove the UK to say, even if all this stuff was true, we can't trust you and your commitments to human rights enough to let this person be sent there. And that's in some ways an even more damning indictment of the United States. And I would just wish to see the international community strongly stand behind the right of publishers and journalists to publish state secrets. And it's an incredibly important principle that remains very much in crisis and under threat.
Right. One last thing before our time is up here. You ran in 2020 and you're possibly considering 2022. Can you very quickly tell us what your strategy is to win in 2022 and how everyone can get up with you?
So one of those pieces of the strategy is going to have to look like holding the Democratic Party accountable. I ran as a Democrat. I'm openly exploring partisan affiliations, like what is the voice that I can best represent in this city. It doesn't involve running against an establishment that stretches well beyond the speaker to include a number of organizations here in San Francisco that unfortunately defend and promote the establishment in the face of the values and concerns that draw the future together. And folks can check us out online and support potential 2022 run at shahidforchange.us or on any of the major social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube at Shahid for Change.
Shahid Buttar, thanks so much for joining me. Best of luck with everything you're working on.
I appreciate it, Benjamin. Keep up the great work. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. Pleasure's ours.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.